What happened in the lives of the apostles? I could see Peter talking to John, and this could be a realistic conversation. John, what do we do? We're wrong. He's not the Messiah. John, he's dead. John, we've left everything. We've left our business. We left our families to follow him, the king that was going to rule the world. John, he's dead. He's not the Messiah. How could we have been so mistaken? And when it says that the apostles went back to their homes and hid themselves out of fear, I believe that, yes, they did have fear. Look, they'd faced off against Rome and Israel. Of course, they had the fear of being killed. But at the same time, I believe when they went and hid themselves in their homes after the crucifixion, they were depressed, disillusioned. Now, come on, put yourself in their shoes, their sandals. Think what they must have been going through. Here they'd been following the Messiah in the face of all opposition. They'd left their businesses, families, everything, because he could not die. He was the reigning political Messiah that would rule the world from Israel. And he was killed. He was dead. I mean, all their aspirations, everything was just destroyed. And when they went to their houses, they were depressed. But something happened. And I remember as a non-believer in the university, as a student, I struggled with this. Something happened. Not over a period of months and years, but of days and weeks. Their lives were turned upside down. And they went out and turned the world upside down. And they were tortured and beaten and persecuted and killed for one thing, an empty tomb. And in their own words, appearance of Jesus of Nazareth for 40 days with many convincing proofs that he was raised from the dead. And they never once denied it under the worst torture. That goes against everything I've ever known of people's character in history. What changed their lives? It was because Christ was raised from the dead and appeared to them. Dr. Kenneth Scott Latourette, who was for years the professor of Oriental history at Yale University, said from discouraged and disillusioned men and women, they sadly looked back upon the days when they had hoped that Jesus was he who should redeem Israel, and they were made over into a company of enthusiastic witnesses. What happened that did that? That so changed them from cowards to men of courage, from martyrs to missionaries. Only thing could have been the resurrection. After the resurrection, after their Savior, the Messiah, was killed, something happened that turned their lives upside down and never once denied it. And the fact was that on the third day he was raised from the dead, and he appeared to them with all kinds of convincing evidence and proofs, they said, that he'd been raised from the dead for 40 days. When I was going into law school, my hero was Dr. Simon Greenleaf. He was the famous Royal Professor of Law for years at Harvard University, one of the great legal minds of our country. He was a man that could break down a testimony in a court of law. In fact, the joke used to be, he was so persuasive he could take someone who was telling the truth and make them think they're telling a lie. And he was a non-believer. And some of the students in his classes one time challenged him to take his, he did 3 volumes on the laws of legal evidence and how to evaluate testimony. They challenged him to take that and apply the same principles to the resurrection. After much persuasion from his students, he did that, and in the process, it looks like he became a believer. And went on to write a book called The Examination of the Testimony of the 4 Evangelists. And Dr. Simon Greenleaf said this, the annals of military warfare afford scarcely an example of their heroic constancy, patient, and unflinching courage. Meaning the apostles, they had every possible motive to review carefully the ground of their faith and the evidence of the great facts and truths they asserted. And yet they became martyrs. That night in the university, I was all alone. It's when I knew I was going to become a Christian. I knew I was going to come to the point of trusting Christ as Savior and Lord. I didn't right then, but I knew I was going to. It's that night I was alone. I spent so much time studying the scriptures and the resurrection. Even though I was all alone, right out loud, I said, He is risen. He is risen. He is risen. If Christ had not been raised from the dead, then what happened to the lives of the apostles that turned their lives upside down? Could a lie have accomplished that? Then if it did, then a lie accomplished more courage, more boldness, and more truth than the truth ever has. I've read all the great thinkers. I've read all the thinkers that think they're great. And I've concluded not one of them has ever come close to satisfying my intellectual curiosity. If Christ wasn't raised from the dead, then what impacted the lives of the apostles and became the very formation, the basis for the formation of the church? He is risen. I can hold the New Testament in my hand and say what I have is what was written down, has not been changed, and what was written down was true. Jesus said this, and Jesus did this.